For the last 30 years, I have led a group for women from narcissistic families. And the flyer for my group, I start off saying, what defines a narcissistic family? In this family, the needs of the parent take precedence over the needs of the child. The narcissistic parent, defending against an underlying sense of inadequacy, recruits the child to complete the parent's sense of self. The child is asked to provide and/or be whatever the parent needs in order to feel whole. As a result, this child becomes an adult with such personality traits as a lack of self-confidence, a chronic need to please, difficulty being assertive, a vulnerability to depression, and she has great difficulty identifying and acting upon her own feelings, wants, and needs. I say to my patients with narcissistic people in their lives, there are only two kinds of relationships you can have with a narcissistic person, either superficial or none at all. This is from a very good book, Why Is It Always About You? The 7 Deadly Sins of Narcissism by Sandy Hotchkiss. What she says is that we all view life through the lens of our experiences. But the narcissist has something more, not just a lens, but a prism that refracts and distorts incoming messages to avoid the intolerable feeling of shame. What this means is you are never in control of how these people perceive you, or when you will be assaulted with some defensive maneuver that deflects their shame, prevents their deflation, or reinflates them after a narcissistic injury. Narcissists constantly dump or project unwanted parts of themselves onto other people. They then begin to behave as if others possess these unwanted parts of themselves, and they may even succeed in getting others to feel as if they actually have those traits or feelings. This is an unconscious process for both the dumper and the dumpee, but what it means is you end up being treated like the dirt they brushed off their own psyches, or feeling the humiliation, the anger, the vulnerability, and the worthlessness that they cannot tolerate themselves. They lob it onto you, you suck it in, and for an icky while, it's yours. If you are young, dependent, or otherwise vulnerable, their disowned parts may stick around and become part of your own self-image. Chances are that something you did without even being aware of it deflated them, and you caught their deflected shame. Most of us have our own vulnerabilities to shaming experiences such as this, but when we cooperate with the projection and take ownership of someone else's shame, there's often a sense of unreality about what has just happened. We may realize we've been treated with contempt, but we generally don't recognize that we've absorbed the shame of the person who's humiliating us, the shame that's been bypassed and kept from their awareness. She also says it helps to think of the narcissist as being about 2 years old on the inside. Narcissistic people do a lot of gaslighting, which means manipulating someone into questioning their own sanity or powers of reasoning to gain power and control, or planting seeds of doubt in another person's mind. The self-doubt and constant questioning slowly causes the individual to question their own reality. Examples would be insisting you said or did things that you know you didn't do, calling you too sensitive or crazy when you express your needs or concerns, or twisting or retelling events to shift blame onto the other person. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders gives diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. And those criteria include: it has a grandiose sense of self-importance, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements, is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high-status people or institutions, requires excessive admiration, has a sense of entitlement, that is, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations, is interpersonally exploitative, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends, lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. You need at least 5 of those 9 criteria to meet the definition of narcissistic personality disorder. Nancy McWilliams, in her wonderful book, Psychoanalytic Diagnosis, she says that people whose personalities are organized around maintaining their self-esteem by getting affirmation from outside themselves are called narcissistic by psychoanalysts. A deficit model seems to fit their experience. There's something missing from their inner lives. Preoccupied with how they appear to others, narcissistically organized people may privately feel fraudulent and loveless. Contemporary clients who are narcissistic often feel subjectively empty rather than full of critical internalizations. They may ruminate about observable assets such as beauty, fame, wealth, or the appearance of political correctness. Image replaces substance. And the persona, the self one shows to the world, becomes more vivid and dependable than one's actual person. It became clear that the overtly grandiose personality was only one form of what we would today construe as a narcissistic problem or disorder of the self. There are many different external manifestations of a core difficulty with identity and self-esteem. Many writers have observed that in every vain and grandiose narcissist hides a self-conscious, shame-faced child, and in every depressed and self-critical narcissist lurks the grandiose vision of what that person should or could be. What narcissistic people of all appearances have in common is an inner sense of, and our terror of, insufficiency, shame, weakness, and inferiority. A related aspect of the upcoming upbringing of people who become narcissistic is a family atmosphere of constant evaluation. If one has an agenda for a child that is vital to one's own self-esteem, then every time that child disappoints, he or she will be criticized either directly or covertly. No one has ever brought up a child without criticism, but the background message that one is not good enough in some vague way is altogether different from specific feedback on behaviors that offend. An evaluative atmosphere of perpetual praise and applause, which one finds in a minority of families with narcissistic children, is equally damaging to the development of realistic self-esteem. The child is always aware of being judged. It's been said that if one grows up in a narcissistic family, then 70% of the men are likely to become grandiose narcissists, and only 30% of the women become grandiose narcissists. And so the women are more likely to become what we call shadow narcissists, which meets those, which I just read a few minutes ago, the person who's hyper attuned, struggles with self-esteem, and has great empathy. That's often the women who grew up in narcissistic families become that sort of person, shadow narcissist. Well, mostly the people who get sucked in have themselves grown up with a difficult or critical or controlling parent. And so they have a lot of empathy. And these kind of people are drawn into relationships with controlling narcissistic people. Alice Miller, in her wonderful book, Drama of the Gifted Child, says that in many families, there's one child whose natural intuitive talents are unconsciously exploited by its caregivers for the maintenance of the caregiver's self-esteem. This child grows up confused about whose life he or she is supposed to lead. Most psychoanalysts believe that people get to be this way by having been used as narcissistic appendages by their parents. Narcissistic patients may have been critically important to parents or other caregivers, not because of who they really were, but because of what function they fulfilled. The confusing message that one is highly valued, but only for a particular role that one plays, makes a child feel as if his or her feelings, especially hostile or selfish ones, are found out, that rejection or humiliation will follow. It fosters the development of what the famous analyst Winnicott has called the false self, the presentation of what one has learned is acceptable. So, in a wonderful book, When Love Goes Wrong, What to Do When You Can't Do Anything Right, Strategies for Women with Controlling Partners, they address the issue of what's keeping you in this relationship. If you're staying with or thinking of returning to a controlling partner, it's useful to figure out what's keeping you in the relationship. That will help you figure out what to do next. So, typical reasons why someone stays. They might say, I'm still hopeful. They might say, I'm afraid of my partner. They might say, I'm afraid that I can't make it financially, or I'm afraid of being alone, or I'm staying here for my children, or I'm bound by my sense of responsibility, or I'm still in the process of making a choice or a plan. And the authors of the book ask women what held them in their relationships too long. They gave us many different answers. Besides financial considerations, 5 items came up again and again. Many women stayed to await the outcome of their partner's counseling program in the hope that he would finally change. Others felt duty-bound by their religion or by the traditions of their cultural community to stay with their husband no matter what. A number of women stayed for the sake of their children. Many stayed because they feared a partner would make good on his threats of suicide, and a lot of women stayed because they were afraid of serious injury or death. In order to stay, in order to minimize the damage from manipulation, usually one needs a really good attorney, even long after the divorce, to turn to whenever these manipulations happen. The legal system is not set up to deal with narcissistic people. Narcissistic people manipulate the legal system to their own ends. I'm thinking of a patient I have who's no longer able to see his children at all because his narcissistic ex-spouse has completely manipulated her lawyer and the judge.